June 10th, 1912, a summer night in Bourder, Colorado, the kind of night when windows were left open, children fell asleep to the sound of crickets, and families believed they were safe. Be silent in a way no one could have imagined. Inside, 8 lives were going to snuffed out with the swing of a blade, and Bourder, once known for its quiet streets and Sunday church bells, would never be the same. But before we continue, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Here we uncover the darkest crimes that small towns try to forget. Bourder, Iowa, in the early 20th century, was the picture of small-town America. A farming community tucked between endless cornfields and dirt roads, with a population that barely touched 2,000. Life here was predictable. Neighbors knew each other's names, children played freely on the streets, and the biggest events of the year were the county fair and the Sunday service. To outsiders, Bourder was nothing more than a dot on the map. To its residents, it was the world. At the center of this world lived the Harrington family. John Harrington, a well-respected businessman in town, his wife Margaret, known for her devotion to church and her gentle nature, and therefore children bright, lively, the kind of kids who could light up a room. They lived in a modest 2-story white house right off Main Street, with lace curtains on the windows and a wooden swing hanging from the front porch. By all accounts, they were the perfect family in the perfect town. That Sunday had been like any other. The Harringtons attended church in the morning. Children laughed and played in the yard. That evening, 2 neighbor girls, close friends of the Harrington children, stayed over for a sleepover, a common occurrence in a town where everyone trusted one another. The house glowed with the warm light of oil lamps, echoing with laughter before bedtime. But what no one knew was that while Bourder slept, something sinister was already moving in the shadows. Across the town, the streets were quiet. The night, air heavy and still, faint breeze rattled the branches of the oak trees. Dogs barked and then fell silent. Somewhere footsteps echoed on the gravel road, steady, deliberate, like the sound of fate itself approaching. Inside the Harrington home, the family drifted into sleep, unaware that the walls around them would soon bear witness to unspeakable horror. The sun rose early that Monday morning, but in the Harrington house, no one stirred. Curtains stayed drawn. The yard, usually alive with the shouts of children, remained silent. And as the hours passed, neighbors began to notice the unsettling stillness. By mid-morning, one of the neighbors, uneasy with the silence, decided to check in. She knocked on the door, no answer. She tried again, calling Margaret's name, still nothing. The uneasy feeling grew heavier, till she reached for the doorknob. What she found inside would shatter Bourder's innocence forever. The moment the front door creaked open, the stench of something unnatural drifted out, a mixture of iron, sweat, and silence, so heavy it felt alive. The neighbor, trembling, stepped into the Harringtons' front hallway. Sunlight seeped through the curtains, painting thin lines of gold across the wooden floor. Everything looked ordinary at first glance. A pair of shoes left neatly by the stairs. A Bible sitting on the entry table. But the air was wrong. Too still, too heavy. She called out again, "Margaret, John." Nothing. Her footsteps echoed through the hallway until she reached the parlor. That's when she saw it, what she would later describe as a scene from hell itself. On the sofa, partially covered by a sheet, was the still body of one of the neighbor girls. Her face unrecognizable, but her small hand clutching the edge of the blanket betrayed her age. The neighbor screamed and stumbled back, rushing into the street for help. Within minutes, word spread through Bourder like wildfire. Shopkeepers abandoned their counters, farmers dropped their tools, and soon a crowd gathered outside the Harrington home. Men whispered in disbelief, women clutched their children close. Nobody wanted to believe what they were hearing. Family, as beloved as the Harringtons, could have been slaughtered in the middle of the night. Right in the heart of town, when Sheriff Thomas Rigby arrived, he immediately ordered everyone back. But it was too late. The curious had already begun. Wandering through the house, leaving footprints on the blood-stained floors, now touching the very objects that could have held answers. In small towns like Bourder, The line between community and chaos blurred quickly. Inside, the scene grew darker with each room. John and Margaret Harrington were found in their bed, still dressed in their nightclothes. Their faces had been struck, repeatedly, to the point of being unrecognizable. Upstairs, the children's rooms told the same story. For small bodies, lifeless under their quilts, their dreams stolen in silence. And in the guest room, the second neighbor girl lay sprawled, just as brutally attacked as the others. All 8 victims. Every soul inside that house, gone. The murder weapon was found leaning against the wall of the shed. Out back, a simple wood-handled axe, its blade dark and sticky. Whoever had done this had left it behind, as if mocking the town. The sheriff tried to keep the details quiet, but nothing in Bourder stayed secret for long. By sunset, the entire county knew. Newspapers would soon arrive, their headlines screaming about the Bourder massacre. Reporters painted the town as a place haunted, cursed, forever stained by the night of June 10th. But for the people who lived there, it wasn't just a headline. It was their reality. Families bolted their doors for the first time. Windows that once stayed open in the summer heat were nailed shut. Fathers kept rifles by their beds. Mothers woke at the faintest sound, clutching their children in fear. The illusion of safety, that comforting belief that evil only belonged to other places, had been shattered. In the following days, the funerals drew thousands. The Harringtons were laid to rest in the small cemetery at the edge of town there. Coffins lined in a row, like soldiers fallen on the same battlefield. The sobs of Margaret's sister echoed across the hills as the church bells tolled, each strike a reminder of the horror that still lingered in the air. Everyone wanted answers. Who could have done something so monstrous? A drifter passing through? A neighbor with a hidden grudge? Or was it someone closer, someone Bourder had trusted all along? The sheriff, overwhelmed and ill-prepared, called in help from outside. Detectives, journalists, and curiosity seekers descended on the quiet town. They interviewed neighbors, inspected the axe, tried to piece together a motive. But with every day that passed, new rumors grew. Some whispered about a stranger seen lurking near the train depot. Others swore they'd heard arguments from the Harrington house days before the murders. And still others, too terrified to say it out loud, wondered if something darker, almost supernatural, had crept into their town that night. What seemed like a simple case of murder was quickly becoming a storm of speculation, fear, and secrets. And as investigators dug deeper, Bourder would learn that the real nightmare was only beginning. The investigation into the Harrington murders began the very morning the bodies were discovered. Sheriff Rigby, overwhelmed by the gruesome scene, quickly called for outside help. By dusk, detectives from neighboring counties and a coroner from Des Moines had arrived in Bourder. The once quiet town was now crawling with strangers in dark coats, their boots crunching on gravel streets, their notebooks open, their eyes scanning every face for secrets. But the first challenge came not from the killer, but from the townspeople themselves. In the hours after the crime, dozens of curious neighbors had walked through the Harrington home, leaving behind fingerprints, disturbing the bodies, and smudging possible clues. Evidence had been trampled before investigators even had a chance. To secure the scene, forensic science in 1912 was already primitive, but here was almost useless. Still, detectives pressed on. The axe, wiped once, but still sticky with blood, became the central piece of evidence. No fingerprints. No signs of forced entry into the home. Whoever had committed the murder seemed to know the Harringtons, or at least knew how to slip quietly into their world. Theories spread faster than the investigators could contain them. Some pointed to a traveling stranger seen near the train depot 2 nights before. A tall man with a crooked hat carrying a worn suitcase. He had asked for directions, but when pressed about his business, he gave only vague answers. To many, he seemed the perfect suspect. Faceless, rootless, gone before the blood had even dried. Others whispered about a business rivalry. John Harrington, respected as he was, had made enemies. He had been involved in land disputes, money-owed partnerships that had soured. One neighbor claimed John had argued heatedly with a man named Elias Burke, just days before the murders. Could it have been revenge? But there was another theory, one that made the townspeople's voices drop to a whisper. A preacher known only as Reverend Collins had recently been holding revival meetings near Bourder. His sermons were fiery, apocalyptic, filled with visions of sin and damnation. He was seen often walking alone at night, Bible in one hand, lantern in the other. And some swore they saw him watching the Harrington house more than once. Was Collins a man of God, or a man hiding behind God's name? Detectives interrogated them all. The drifter, if he existed, was gone, vanished on a train before his name could even be written down. Burke denied everything, insisting his argument with John had been about nothing more than a delayed payment. And Reverend Collins, his answers were calm to calm. He claimed he had been at home the night of the murders, alone, with no one to confirm his alibi. Meanwhile, the townspeople grew restless. Fear turned into suspicion. Neighbors who once shared meals now avoided eye contact. Doors stayed locked even in the daytime. At night, the sound of footsteps on gravel sent families rushing to their windows. Hearts pounding. Journalists arrived by the dozens, their cameras flashing, their pens scratching out sensational headlines. Bloody massacre in Bourder. 8 souls lost in midnight slaughter. Porters prowled the streets, shoving microphones into trembling hands. Asking questions the sheriff refused to answer, and with every article printed, Bourder's reputation darkened. What had once been described as a wholesome farming community was now painted as cursed ground. Then came the rumors of sightings. One woman swore she saw a shadowy figure moving near the Harrington barn days after the murders. Another claimed she found a bloody handprint on her fence post one morning, though it was never confirmed. Children whispered about hearing the sound of chopping wood late at night, even when no one was outside. The detectives sifted through it, all facts, lies, half-truths. But no matter how deep they dug, the answers remained elusive. And then, a discovery reignited the case behind the Harrington property. In the tall grass near the cornfields, a handkerchief was found, stained, torn. The initials EB stitched into its corner. Elias Burke. The town erupted. To many this was proof. Enough. But to others, it only deepened the mystery. Could someone have planted it? Could the killer have wanted to frame Burke, leading the investigation down the wrong path? Bourder was now divided between those demanding Burke's arrest, and those convinced the real killer still roamed free. And as tensions boiled over, the line between justice and hysteria began to blur. The discovery of the blood-stained handkerchief with the initials EB sent shockwaves through Bourder. For many, it was the piece of evidence they had been waiting for. Sheriff Rigby, under immense pressure, brought Elias Burke into custody. Burke, a man in his early 40s, with a rugged face and a farmer's hands, denied everything. He claimed the handkerchief had been stolen from his barn weeks earlier. He admitted to arguing with John Harrington about money, but insisted he had left the matter behind. But suspicion is a fire, and in a small town, it spreads fast. When word got out that Burke had been taken in, a mob gathered outside the jailhouse. Men shouted for justice, fists pounding on wooden doors. Mothers cried out, demanding vengeance for the children lost. The sheriff, pale with fear, stood at the window watching the crowd swell, praying they would not force their way in. For one night, Bourder felt on the brink of tearing itself apart. Inside the interrogation room, detectives pressed Burke relentlessly. They laid the blood-stained handkerchief in front of him. They asked about his whereabouts the night of the murders. Burke swore he had been at home, asleep in his bed, but he had no witness to confirm his story. His wife had died years earlier. His children were grown and gone. He was a man alone, making him an easy target. Still, something didn't sit right. One detective, a seasoned investigator named Charles Denton, noticed small details in the Harrington house that didn't fit the theory of Burke's guilt. The killer had lingered. Food had been taken from the kitchen. Windows had been covered with sheets, as if the murderer didn't want neighbors to see the light of lanterns. This wasn't the work of a man in a blind rage. It was cold, calculated. And Then there was the axe itself. Denton examined it closely. The handle was wiped, yes, but not thoroughly. Faintly, almost invisible to the naked eye, were smudges. Not fingerprints, but soot. The kind you'd find on the hands of someone who worked around fire. A stove, a lantern, or dove lingered. Meanwhile, Reverend Collins continued to move freely about the town. He preached at the revival meetings, spoke of sin and punishment, and reminded his flock that evil lurked even among them. To some, his words brought comfort. To others, they sounded like hidden confessions. He was often seen wandering near the train tracks, Bible clutched tight, eyes darting as if haunted by something only he could see. When questioned again, Collins smiled. He said the murders were God's way of cleansing the town. He insisted. He knew nothing of what had happened in the Harrington house. His alibi remained the same. He was home, alone, reading scripture by lantern light. But Denton pressed him. If you were alone, Reverend, how can anyone know for sure? Collins leaned forward, his voice soft but sharp. Because God knows. And isn't that enough? Detectives exchanged uneasy glances as days turned into weeks. The investigation spiraled. Witnesses contradicted one another. Rumors drowned out facts. Some swore they saw Burke near the Harrington home that night. Others insisted Collins was seen pacing near the property after midnight. And still others whispered of a third figure, a stranger, a man with a limp, seen boarding a train before dawn. The town's fear deepened. Parents kept children locked inside. Businesses closed early. The Harrington home, still stained with horror, became a place of pilgrimage for the curious. People whispered about curses, about restless spirits, about the devil walking freely through Bourder's streets. Reporters thrived on the chaos. Headlines grew more lurid. The Axe Fiend of Iowa. Bourder's bloody secret. And with every line printed, the town sank deeper into infamy. Sheriff Rigby, exhausted and desperate, leaned toward charging Burke. The evidence, thin as it was, could at least quiet the mobs. But Detective Denton resisted. He warned that if they convicted the wrong man, the true killer would remain free. And then, another revelation surfaced. A local boy, just 12 years old, came forward trembling. He told investigators that on the night of the murders, he had been sneaking out to fish by the creek. As he crept through the fields near the Harrington home, he saw a faint light flickering in the house. And through the window, he swore he saw a man standing still in the parlor, holding something long and heavy in his hands. When asked to describe him, the boy said, only one thing stuck in his mind. He had a hat. A wide-brimmed hat, like a preacher wears. The room fell silent. Was the boy telling the truth? Or was his imagination fueled by whispers and fear? No one could be certain. But the mention of the hat shifted suspicion once more, away from Elias Burke and back toward Reverend Collins. The town, already divided, now fractured completely, and as the tension reached its breaking point, Bourder was about to face its most terrifying night since the murders themselves. By late July, more than a month after the murders, Bourder was a town on edge. Fear had turned to anger, and anger to desperation. With no arrest, no conviction, and no peace, whispers became shouts. The people wanted blood. On a sweltering summer night, a crowd gathered outside Reverend Collins' small clapboard house. Dozens of men, their faces shadowed by lantern light, stood shoulder to shoulder. Some carried rifles, others farm tools. Sharpened into weapons, their voices rose in a low chant. Justice, justice, justice. Inside, Collins sat at his table, Bible open, sweat dripping down his brow. He could hear them outside, the pounding of fists, the threats. The demand that he confess didn't move. He simply whispered verses under his breath, as if scripture could shield him from the storm that had come to his door. Sheriff Rigby arrived before the mob could break inside, standing alone against the crowd. His voice cracked as he begged them to step back. If you do this, there's no turning back. Let the law handle it. But the law had already failed them. The Harringtons were gone. The killer was free, and patience had run out. Detective Denton pushed through the crowd, his eyes locking on Collins. He had studied this man. Eerie calm, the cryptic answers, the way he lingered near the Harrington home before the murders. Every instinct told him the Reverend was hiding something. But instinct was not proof. And without proof, Denton knew this night could end in blood. The Reverend finally stepped outside. Lantern light flickered across his face, casting long shadows across the yard. He raised his hands, palms open. I did not kill them, he said, voice steady. But God knows who did. And he will reveal the truth in his time. The mob roared. Some lunged forward, others hesitated, unsure. Rigby and Denton forced their way between Collins and the men, their hands raised, shouting for calm. For a moment, it seemed the crowd would explode into violence. But then, slowly, reluctantly, they stepped back. Collins' life was spared that night, but his reputation was destroyed. Within weeks, he left Bourder, vanishing into obscurity. Some claimed he continued preaching in distant towns. Others swore he disappeared into madness. Haunted by secrets he never confessed, Elias Burke, though never formally charged, lived the rest of his life under suspicion. Neighbors crossed the street to avoid him. Children whispered his name as though it were a curse. He, too, became a ghost among the living. In the Harrington house, it stood for years, empty, windows broken, paint peeling. People avoided walking past after dark. Some claimed to hear children's laughter echoing inside. Others swore they saw a figure with a wide-brimmed hat staring from the upstairs window. The case of the Harrington family murders was never solved. No confession, no conviction, just a town forever changed. For Bourder, Iowa. June 10, 1912 marked the death of innocence. The day when trust was shattered, when neighbors became suspects, and when silence at dawn meant something far darker than peace. More than a century later, the murders remain a chilling reminder of how fragile the line between safety and horror truly is. In Bourder, the cornfields still stretch endlessly across the horizon. The church bells still ring on Sundays, and children still play in the summer heat. But beneath it all lingers the same question that haunted the town for generations. Who swung the axe, and why? This was Quiet Town Crimes. If you want to uncover more stories of secrets, shadows, and violence hidden in the quietest corners of America, make sure you subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Because sometimes, the darkest crimes don't happen in big cities. They happen right next door.